What's going on, everybody out there in the wild? Hope you're all having a fantastic evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. We are broadcasting to all 360 degrees of the human sphere called planet Earth. So I hope that we're reaching you in good health and hopefully sunshine or moonlight or wherever you are. I am Axis Alive, and I'm joined tonight by a couple of philosophical thinkers, Scott V, the Mad Musician, and brother KG, in the background with internet money and other awesome protocols. And we're here tonight to kind of talk about the universal one and the universal principles of life and creation. Kind of a different topic than we're used to talking about around here, where it usually is more in the realm of cryptocurrency and the DeFi movement. There are going to be common threads throughout this stream that's going to draw back into what is DeFi, what is money, what is currency, energy, and life itself, and where this is all going. Because cryptocurrency really is a human right, the freedom to transact, and it's a philosophical underpinning of what it means to be human. And so, hopefully, throughout this, we'll be able to combine our brain forces and just blow your minds with some new, interesting topics of discussion. So, without further ado, I'm bringing on the two homies. What up, KG? What up, Scott V?
What's going on?
What's up? What's up?
Yo,
Thanks.
so just to set the precedent here, I think I met Scott V for the first time in Vegas last year, and it was actually this. It was the same. It was the day after this. I think it was the day after I met KG in the same trip. So here we are in the Nevadan desert. It's 125 degrees out, sweating on a golf course, and this giant whirlwind of curly brown hair comes flying down the golf cart path, and about runs me over. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't about run me over, and he just starts talking to me. This like he knows me, like he's my best friend, someone I had never met before, and this was really relatable for me because it was like it's basically how I approach these types of situations in the real world as well, whereas I just talk to people at a human one-to-one level. Like, if you give respect on that base level, like usually you're met with that same energy. And that's kind of what it was like meeting KG for the first time. And for anyone that's, been following that for a while, he and I have gone and done multiple philosophy streams, going back to like the early part of this year. One of them was actually with Jack Levin, and some other folks. Crypto Coffee I think was supposed to be in on one of those, and anyway, we've dove deep on topics before, like what is God and like what is AI, where's AI's place in creation, and those were always interesting, like little debates that we had. So yeah, happy to have him on. And then Scott V, he's like a frequency wizard. He like understands time and space in a way that a lot of other people don't, and that gives him this ability to create music and he has this creative energy or force about him that he's tapped by digging deeper into these philosophical, scientific, and mathematical underpinnings, that he learned, in part probably by his intuition alone, but also through his studies in this Walter Russell material. And Walter Russell was was a savant of his day in the early 1900s, a guy way ahead of his time, and he had been tapped into all these other universal knowledge pieces that he was basically pulling from the ether itself. And so tonight Scott's gonna kind of explain for you guys through presentation format some of these concepts, and we'll try to bring it all back full circle toward the end on where this puts us now at this time in history.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Great intro.
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here, man. I'm a big fan of your channel, man, and big fan of both of you guys. I also I met KG that same Vegas trip. So it's great to continue to connect. And that's just part of the hex and pulse chain community. It's just we're a different kind of beast. All of us. We're like gonna be friends for life. It's just the way it is. So yeah, I can take it away, you know, if unless you guys wanted to talk about anything beforehand, but I'm ready to rock and roll if y'all are ready.
Hell yeah.
Well, I just before you get started, Scott. Yeah, great to meet both you guys. You know that I do miss that long curly hair. You know, that was it was both you gentlemen are incredible human beings, and I think that the topic that we're going to go into tonight, something that I was actually telling somebody earlier. Oh, hey, this is the topic that we're going to go into tonight, and they were kind of asking like, why are you talking about that? You know, what's the point?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting question because, you know, maybe we're just sitting here saying things that don't matter. But I think that these things that we're about to talk about, whether we're right or whether we're wrong, I think that there are no more important topics that can be discussed by human beings because we're trying to figure out what the nature of our existence is. And so for everybody listening, all we ask is keep an open mind and have some fun with us.
So we got almighty Hexicans wondering like, how'd you do this shirt, bro?
I know, isn't that awesome? Look at that.
So I told both these guys the story, but long story short, I was setting up for this stream and I was trying to do a virtual background because I'm not in my normal home studio. And there was an option that said, do you have a green screen or a blue screen? And I just thought by selecting it, it would give me a better virtual background. And the shirt I was wearing just happened to be blue. And so when I clicked on the blue screen, it attached the virtual background to my shirt. So that's why it was a total accident, if there are such a thing. And that's why you see this right now.
You pose a very interesting question, you know, on the topic of are accidents even, do they fit into the mold of what is creation now? You have some people that sit on the determinism fence, which is that everything is predetermined by cause and effect. And then it's kind of like limited free will. And then you have people on the other side, which is like max free will. And I think it's a big topic. If you want the Spark Notes version, freedom and determinism is like on a spectrum from like left to right. And so your consciousness is like this, and inside of there is the slider. And so like depending on where you focalize your consciousness is where you are on the slider. So like the more, we're all always going to be trapped on the slider to a point, and then when you break free of the slider, you realize it's just a circular it's a circular, like a wheel, like a cyclical cause and effect, but that you can branch out. Instead of it being a flat plane like this, it spirals up, which you can unlock further and further levels of freedom with which each persisting year or each time frame. So it gets deep, but so we're always going to be limited somewhat by our physical apparatus, the body, because that is very much dense and grounded in reality on Earth. But through technology and consciousness expansion, you can unlock further and further deeper technologies that give you more of a godlike personality in the universe. So the farther you go down that level and you unlock more and more layers of the mental, you actually unlock more and more layers of godlike status in the universe. But this happens across a species, across aeons of time, not just one lifetime for one human. So we each play a part in that progression of moving the ball forward. And so tonight we're going to do that for you guys with this presentation. I hope you guys are excited because I know I am.
Degrees of awareness. Everything is degrees of awareness. Well said, Axis.
So, well, yes, well said. And I definitely can comment on that with, oh man, so there's a lot, guys. So, you know, so, all right. Are you guys able to see my screen now?
We got you up, brother. We can see it. The Walter Russell concept. What is this blasphemy?
Walter Russell concept.
Stone him.
So first, let me tell you a little bit about me, like, and why I'm qualified to, you know, to give you this presentation. So, you know, I've always been a truth seeker. You know, I was agnostic, really. You know, I studied different religions and philosophies, and nothing really like resonated with me. And I kind of dropped it for a while. I was just like became basically like an atheist, where I wasn't spiritual at all. And you know, I just started studying science, you know, theoretical physics, and but even in my studies of traditional science, something wasn't quite right. Like, you know, the double slit experiment where they talk about like one particle going through, and yet then there's like a wave interference pattern. It's like, what, how can that be? What's going on? So I started studying, you know, more or less mainstream scientists like Nikola Tesla. And that's how I found a man named Walter Russell. Okay. And a side note for the hexagons or pulse people watching this, Walter Russell is like the Richard Hart of science. Okay, because he's not, you know, as well known as like, you know, your Einstein or someone like that, you know, but his stuff is just better. and it's better, and it threatened the mainstream scientists in academia back then. So, you know, there was some gatekeeping. So, you know, I think it was a really interesting parallel, you know, knowing Richard Hart in crypto and how he's treated, but how there's a small group of people who, you know, the people who actually open their mind and listen to what Richard Hart actually says, then they know like he's saying some quality stuff, like top level stuff. Okay. So that's how it is that's kind of how it is with Walter Russell in terms of science. The people who can actually open their minds and listen to what his message is, they will see that it's like top level. But there's going to be a lot of people that will just dismiss him right away, you know, and call him a scammer or whatever, you know. So I just thought that was an interesting parallel. So you know, Nikola Tesla and Walter Russell were friends. And, you know, so I started, you know, looking into Walter Russell's life, and I found these examples of his incredible genius. Like this, you know, Walter Russell dropped out of school when he was like in grade school, like maybe like fourth grade or something, and became a child prodigy pianist, okay, to pay his bills. Like he would help support his family by making money, you know, playing, you know, the piano. Later on, he became a painter. And like he was such a creative person, whatever he did, he always like rose to the top level of whatever he was doing. So like when he became a painter, then he became the painter for the president of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt. He would paint like his family's portraits and stuff. Later, he decides, oh, now I'm going to be a sculptor. Same thing. He rose up. Then FDR is calling him, hey, I want you to do a sculpture of me. You know, he did like this famous big bust of FDR. Later on, he became an architect. He ended up, you know, creating $30 million of buildings in New York City. You know, some of those buildings are still up today. He became like a business consultant for a little company called IBM. You might have heard of them. And that company did pretty well after his consulting. And two more things, because the list goes on. So I'll just say two more things. One, he was a championship figure skater. Okay. And then later in his life, he started studying theoretical physics. And so once again, he rose and he predicted elements, new elements that were not discovered at that time. Now I'm talking back in like 1926. Okay. And before. And, you know, when I read this, I looked into it. So he created his own periodic table of the elements. And whereas we normally think hydrogen is the first element, the lightest element, and back then uranium was like the heaviest. He was like, no, guys, there's more elements than what you know. There are elements that are lighter than hydrogen, and there are elements that are heavier than uranium. And so he told scientists where to look for them. And so sure enough, they found tritium and deuterium, which didn't fit into their construct. They were like, well, we can't, you know, hydrogen's number one. We can't have anything lower. So they decided to just call them isotopes of hydrogen. And Russell was like, no, they're actually full elements. Anyway, so then he told them to look above uranium, and he helped them discover plutonium and neptunium, and, you know, which were huge discoveries. But he didn't get the credit for this, even though he published his book in 1926 with this periodic table, you know, before these discoveries. And the book that he published was called The Universal One. Let me see if I got a copy of it right here. Sure. Let's see. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see that with my space background.
I got mine in the other room.
Well, yeah, it's all right. But The Universal One was essentially his first book, and it is an amazing book. It, describes all kinds of theoretical physics about the universe, and his philosophy. And so, I looked into this. I was like, how is this guy able to predict elements? Like, he's got to know something. So I started looking into it. And, and so what I found was, and this is where I think some people just kind of wrote him off right away, because so he was born in the month of May. And so every month, every time, the month of May came around, he would get these flashes of light, like these ideas. Even Tesla had the same thing. Tesla talked about having flashes of light, and like this knowledge would come to him, and then he would have like a new invention, and so every May he would get these flashes, but every 7th May the flashes would be more intense. And then after 7 periods of 7 years, when he was 49 years old, he had the biggest, longest flash of light. He called it an illumination. And he essentially, and it was a 39-day illumination, but at the end of it, basically he basically said, guys, I've been essentially given like the download from God, like from the mind of the universe, whatever you want to call it, an intelligence, a higher power. He was like, I received this message in a nonverbal way, and I was told that I was chosen because I have this kind of the skills and abilities to draw, to paint and draw diagrams and write and describe this, and that I should give this this knowledge to the world. And so he did. He like wrote it all down in books. Okay, and so this stuff that he wrote down is like, it's so amazing that it's like it describes. It's essentially a theory of everything, right now. Like, well, I'll go into that in the presentation. Anyway, so his buddy Nikola Tesla was one of the few people who could understand it, because well, Tesla was a genius also. And he was like, he said, my buddy Walter, he said, you got to hide this away for 1,000 years. This knowledge, you just put it in a time capsule, hide it away for 1,000 years until the human intelligence will unfold enough to be able to understand it. So that's what Tesla said about it. Now, I still say Tesla didn't know that we were going to have the internet. The internet is a wonderful thing. It's like, we can spread knowledge a lot faster. And so it's my goal, to kind of spread this knowledge, because, I continued to study his stuff for years. And, and so now I'm currently the chief science officer of the University of Science and Philosophy, which is, it was the Walter Russell Foundation. And there's now a museum there where they have, it's like 37 tons of this guy's work. He did that much work. And so there's an annual, they have various events. We have various events. One of the big ones is an annual homecoming that we do. It's coming up this October 6th, 6th through 8th. So I'm going to be the keynote speaker there. And so I'm going to be giving a presentation on Walter's science. And so that's what I'm going to show you guys today. Not the whole presentation, but number one, because I haven't finished the whole thing just yet. But number two, it's also like, it's a paid event. That's for the people who are like, for paying for that. And number two, we just don't have enough time tonight to go through all of it. But
that's awesome. Thank you so much, man. Yeah. Before we get into it, let's just. So I like that story about, for those who don't know, Nikola Tesla was probably one of the pioneers in a lot of like the electrogravitic, like that push into physics and stuff. And a lot of his creations, that got, hidden for some time, were like the first advancements in that field. And so, it's cool that that they were connected, and it's interesting that he thought maybe that this information, wouldn't be ready for 1,000 years. And I think that this is a good point to basically jump in and say that, humanity, he obviously he didn't predict the advent of the internet and the increasing of the bit rate at the rate at which the human mind is able to evolve now because of the interconnectedness and the
Right.
speed of transmission of information. And so I think, we're put here at this place in time. We were talking about, the perfect time, and we are in that time now where we're called upon to share this information with you in the same way that Walter Russell was in discovering it in the first place. So, honored to be here, and can't wait to see what you got.
And
Definitely.
Scott, but before you jump in, I want to say one point as well.
Yeah.
So with what you were talking about, Nicola telling Walter, hey man, put this away, lock it in a box.
Yeah.
We often see that people who have these revolutionary ideas, they're told to suppress it because humanity isn't ready to receive. Now, this
Right.
is not my quote. This is actually a quote that I heard somebody was giving a talk one time. And I think it's very relevant to what you just said,
Yeah.
but also to everybody who thinks outside the box. He said, I do not share my thoughts in attempt to convince the ignorant to change their minds. I share my thoughts so that others who think clearly know they are not alone.
Wow. Nice. I like that. Do you know who that was who said that?
It was actually just a non-famous guy.
Wow.
He was
Hey,
given.
nice quote.
He was. I'll tell you the story later. He was a non-famous guy. Non-famous
Sure.
guy. Yeah.
Okay, so so this will be a brief introduction because I'm telling you guys, like, as you can imagine, with a theory of everything, it goes deep, okay, and it's comprehensive. So all right, we're going to talk about light, we're going to talk about motion, and we're going to talk about forces. And I want to start with the word concept. Now, throughout science, people have concepts, they have ideas, and then they can put those ideas into motion. And if they make something and they can test it in the physical world and it gets tested enough, then it can become a theory. It can become a law of physics. So, like, for example, Isaac Newton, he had a concept, an idea that mass attracts mass, right? And that the time runs the same for everyone, like one big clock in the sky for everyone. And this worked to describe physical reality for a long time. Then along comes another man named Einstein, Albert Einstein, who has he had a concept or an idea. Now his idea was a little different, that he combined space and time through mathematics. And then he said that this space-time can curve, and this curvature of space-time, this is what is causing the effects of, say, like the planets going around the sun, the things that we attribute to gravity. He's saying it's because of this curved space-time. And so he put that idea into motion, and it was tested, and sure enough, it was validated. Now Newton's concept was just fine. I mean, it worked beautifully, but along comes someone else, and it's not like a contest, like, oh, Einstein is better than Newton. It's just the evolution of science as we get better. So Walter also had a concept, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So we start off with a postulate, right? Or an axiom or a postulate, an assumption. It's a statement that's taken to be true to serve as a premise or starting point for further reasoning and arguments. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about these three postulates of Walter Russell's concept. Now, you have to have an open mind here and take these to be true so that we can discuss the concept. Okay, and because believe me, I've studied normal traditional physics, so some of the stuff that when I say it, I hear it coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, that doesn't, that's not right, but just, you got to go with it. We're going to go with it here.
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm simplifying that, there are more of these postulates, But for now, I think to give you guys something to hold on to we're going to start with these three. Number one, the universe is made up of only one substance, and that's light. Okay. Number two, the universe exists in only two states. It's either in stillness or it's in motion. So we're talking about this light. It's either still or it's in motion. Okay. And then the last of the three is that there are only two forces in the universe: gravitation and radiation. Okay. See, like that one, it hurts my ears as a scientist to say, what do you mean there's only two forces? What about the electromagnetic force? The strong and the weak nuclear force. Okay. But just, we're going with this. Okay.
So
this is a good point. Yep.
So by gravitation, do you mean contraction and radiation expansion?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go through this. Now, there is a little asterisk here that I put. There's really only one force. He says there's really only one force, that apparently creates two equal opposite directions and force. And, but that's more of his philosophical, like his philosophy would say that the one force is the mind of God, is the mind of the universe, the higher intelligence.
Right. And that manifests itself as light, right?
Yes, that manifests itself, and more specifically, which I'll go into later, that is the still light. But then it manifests itself in moving light into these two. It's essentially breaks a balance and equilibrium into these two forces, which are opposites of each other,
like a positive and negative poles.
Yeah,
this binary principle is like one that really rings true for me as well. Like that in an analog to this would be that all there is light, and that there's only one other option, which is like off, which is like that there's an absence of light.
Right.
So like positive, negative, light, dark, but the dark doesn't exist. It's just the lack of light. So it's like light on a spectrum of, as I was speaking earlier on, and this is what it's that movement, right? The motion versus the stillness. It's all here in this, so that really you're still only talking about one principle, which is just light or beingness, like creation, thought, just the awareness of itself, right? It's it's so present and always and everywhere that it expands way beyond any other human concept, because all the other human concepts are just distortions of the original thought, which is light or beingness. Yes.
Dude, you're like saying some of the stuff that's going to be later on in the presentation. Like you're spot on, dude. All right, so I'm gonna move forward just to let you know these are some of the research books that I've read to be able to come to this knowledge. And all these books are books that he wrote. You can find them at philosophy.org. That's the website for the University of Science and Philosophy. All of these are books, except for this one. The home study course is actually a full course that's designed for people who really want to go deep, deep, deep and get the entire experience of what he's, trying to teach. That's what the home study course is for. All right, so going for us. All right, so there's three postulates. So we're going to start with first one, light, and talk about that. So in order to give you a framework, I have to talk a little bit about his philosophy first. Okay, so you can imagine it as there are two universes. Now, I put it in quotes because it's not actually two universes. There's only one universe, but I like to think of it kind of as two universes. One is the universe of the sensed, where we can sense things with our five senses. Okay, that's the universe of motion that we're in. This table, this chair, the walls. Now, that's one universe. The other universe is we can't sense it with our five senses, but Walter says it can be known. Okay. An example is like the little voice that's inside yourself that, you hear, that can give you messages, that can tell you right from wrong or give you a hunch about something. You don't hear this voice like with your ears, or your senses, but yet it's there. Okay. It can be known. Okay. That's one example. So let's see. Let me go to the next thing. Stillness and motion, the two states that light can be in. All right. Light and stillness. light and stillness cannot be seen by our human senses. We cannot see absolute darkness, but we can perceive the absence of light. Like when we look upon the night sky, we see the stars, and we perceive the absence of light between the stars. Okay. So I'll give you this analogy. Think of an indoor swimming pool that's been closed for weeks. The water surface is motionless, smooth like glass. Okay. So to describe light and stillness, first I have to actually describe the opposite, which is motion. So imagine you throw a small rock, like a little pebble, into the pool. Motion starts. Okay. Waves form, right? You can measure a wave. It has dimensions. It has length, width, height. You can measure the frequency at which the crests rise and fall. Now you can measure the time that it takes the crest to move a distance, and that gives us speed. Now I put this in quotes also, or parentheses, because actually in Walter's concept, light does not travel. It's actually everywhere in the universe already. So it's just an illusion. And have you, if you look at, say, a football stadium, you know, when the fans are in the football stadium and they want to do the wave, you guys familiar with that concept? So like everyone's sitting in their seat, but if they stand up and then sit down at the perfect time, there's an illusion that there's a wave traveling around the stadium. Okay. Now it's a wave of people traveling around the stadium. Now, these people are not actually traveling. They're just staying in their stationary little boxes of their seats. Okay. But they're pulsating up and down. And that is kind of how Walter's theory is that you'll get light pulsating in one area. He calls it a cubic wave field, but you can think of it as like a person in their seat pulsing up and down. That's how you'll get an illusion of a wave traveling. All right. So we'll keep going.
Question
here.
real quick. You might ask a question.
Sure.
So trying to conceptualize non-motion, my initial thinking is to reject the idea. Not that I want to. I'm completely open-minded, but like
Sure.
Initially where my mind was the idea, because if everything exists in a vibratory state, everything is moving all the time, regardless if we perceive it to be or not.
Right.
So I don't know if there is a true motion.
So let me comment on that. Let me finish this little section here.
But by all means, please.
So, okay. So we threw the little pebble in and we got these little waves. Now, if you throw a large bowling ball in, the waves would have different values for their dimensions, right? Like the height or the amplitude would be larger, right? And so these larger waves would have different properties than the smaller ones from the pebble, right? You know, all of these different measurable wave properties are dimensions of the wave. Okay, this is what Walter talks about. He says they are dimensions of motion. Okay, and this is very important because in Walter Russell's concept, there are 18 dimensions of motion. Okay, and we'll more on that in just a little bit. So, and just to be clear, these are not dimensions like outside of our three-dimensional space, like someone saying, you know, I've been teleported to another dimension, like the multiverse, you know, and they're not imaginary, abstracted mathematical dimensions. Okay, these are observable, measurable properties of nature, and that's one of the reasons why Walter's concept is, in my opinion, you know, really good, because these are things that are true to nature rather than like
these are like characteristics or properties of nature. And so I'll give you an example to like what KG was saying.
Yeah.
Like negative degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius, pick one, is relatively very cold and slow relative to 120 degrees.
Right.
And this is one of the characteristics or properties of nature, and it's called temperature.
Exactly.
And if you take temperature deep enough into the cold, things begin to be observably to the point where they're still. But they may still have motion because, again, it's just the same spectrum that, it, you know, from the very far end of the negative to the very far end of the positive, it's the same light particles acting by their characteristics of nature. So it's
Right.
still the same substance or substrate that's just showing itself, manifesting itself in these different characteristics of nature.
Yes, yes, exactly. So here they are. Here are the 18 dimensions of motion. I'll go through them a little bit. I'm not going to go in depth into them, but some of the ones that are a little weird, I'll talk about. So the first three, length, breadth, and thickness, I put them down exactly how Walter wrote them in his book. But you can think of these as like length, width, and height. Obviously, it's like distance, like a line is length. Then when you add a second dimension, there you got area, like a square sheet of paper, 2-dimensional. And then when you add thickness or height, then you get volume, right? Like a cube. Okay. Number 4 is time, and that is just a duration between events. I do like how Walter really treats time in an amazing way, and it's less mysterious. All right, number 5 is sex, and what he means by that is basically polarity of like a difference, kind of a positive and negative difference. Then you've got pressure, you've got potential, and I've underlined potential because we're going to go deeper into potential today. That's a really important one. You got temperature, you've got ionization, crystallization, and valence. Those are, that kind of deals with chemistry. When you get into the chemistry of this concept, 12 and 13 are interesting. 12 is axial rotation, like how the Earth spins around on its axis, right? He calls that speed time. And then 13 is orbital revolution, like the planet orbiting around the sun. He calls that power time. And those two are actually inversely proportional to each other. Like the faster one of them goes, then the other one goes slower. And that's just an example. You can see that in the, in our solar system. Like, for example, Mercury, that's closer to the sun, it has an orbital revolution where it spins around the sun. It orbits very fast, but its axial rotation, it doesn't spin so fast. Versus like, say, a Jupiter or Saturn that's farther out, their orbit is very slow, but their axial rotation is very fast.
This relationship is like super important to understand, and it's going to be hard for me to like dive deep enough on it. But the point here is that it's this relationship that makes the world a place where there's no accidents. Like on the human level, it can be perceivably so, but because it's more like cogs in a wheel, and like all of the pieces of the universe are moving in sync in relation to each other, everything is perfectly in place. And so like imagine a world where one of the planets of our solar system blows up completely. It's still going to have a certain spin where its particles still remain, because it's got that power time that's got it'll exist beyond its it being consolidated into one unit.
Right.
And that'll go on for some time, which is probably back with where, let's see here. It's just a duration of time that but the point is that but then it shifts everything around it slightly, so that these orbital revolutions and axial rotations will change relatively, because the mass of that planet has now shifted and changed. So all the other pieces of the clock, all these different gears in this, the wheel in the sky now are shifted because of that, because everything is in relation to each other.
Oh man, that is a great point. That's I'm going to make that. Let me finish these last 3 or 4 dimensions, and I want to comment on that. So then, you got mass, you got color, you got plane of gyroscopic rotation, which I would explain as like, say you have a top. When you spin a top, how it will stand up, right? Like it'll stand up 90 degrees from the floor that it's spinning on or whatever. And it'll stay there as long as the motion is fast enough. But when the motion starts slowing down, the top, it'll start to wobble, right? Like, and first it'll be, instead of its axis being 90 degrees, like straight up and down, then it'll go to like 80 degrees, 70, 60. It gets down to like 45. So that is the plane. That is the plane from 0 to 90. That is the plane of gyroscopic rotation. And that actually is an important one also with chemistry. But so then number 17, we've got the ecliptic, which just means the area of the equator, the equatorial plane of a map. Like if it's the Earth you're talking about, the Earth has an equator. It's that area. and that area expands and contracts when a planet the planets are not all perfectly spherical. They either oblate or prolate to, so that they're a little bit like they might bulge a little bit at the, like if you look at Saturn, it's bulging at the equator. Okay. So when it bulges, there's a measurement of the ecliptic plane. Anyway, that's one of the dimensions that can be measured. And the last one is tone, also known as sound. So to comment on what Axis just said, he's totally right. Like all of these 18 dimensions, they're all interrelated. So that if any one of them changes, all the rest of them change to make sure everything is balanced out. That's the kind of the beauty of Walter's concept. And it just shows how the universe is perfectly balanced in every way. He said that you can't move your little pinky finger without affecting all the galaxies throughout the entire universe. Like that's how precision the universe is, and how interrelated those dimensions are. Okay, so
String
now that
theory, right? String theory, isn't that
so not string theory, although it's closer to ring theory.
Okay.
Because in the end, it's almost like everything is made out of rings. I'll get to that a little later.
Please.
But so now that I've described now we can describe stillness compared to motion, right? So the stillness is the opposite of motion, and therefore it has no dimensions of motion. So there's no time. There's no beginning or end. There's no distance because no one point is discernible from any other point. Everything is just infinitely the same. And so this is what, when we go back, remember I said there were like, two universes. It's kind of like the universe of motion versus the universe of stillness. And I admit this is like the hardest thing of Walter's whole philosophy and concept to really grasp onto, because number one, it's kind of like, okay, you're telling me there's this still light that we can't perceive with our senses. Like where's the proof, dude? And he says, even though we can't sense it, we can know that it's there. And he gives a lot of examples of that throughout his work, but and because that still light that's not moving, he's essentially saying that is the mind of God, or that is God. And because it's not moving, it's endless, it's infinite, and it's timeless. There's no beginning and no end. And it's also everywhere, all at once, all at the same time. Like any point, you could be over here or you could be 1,000 miles over there. Those 2 points are actually the same point because there's no difference between them. So he's basically saying that God is like interspersed with the universe of motion that we're used to, of things moving around, that we can see with our senses. He says that like it's interspersed with that. And this really kind of blew my mind. So he said that world of the still light of God, or he called it the mind of God, he says that is the real world. And he says, but the world that you and I see that is in motion, he says that is an illusion. It's an illusion. It's a total illusion of motion, and it's totally temporary. It's fleeting. And so it's kind of counterintuitive to what you would think. It flips, like, because we think, I think that this table that I'm not banging on, this is real, okay? But he's like, nope, it's the reverse. All of this stuff, like, and here's the example that he gives. So someone built this table, right, that my computer here is on, but it came from the world of the mind, which is timeless. The person, whoever the carpenter or whoever made this had to have an idea about this table. Okay. And the carpenter himself is not the table. All right. And the idea that the carpenter had is also not the table. The table is simply a representation of the idea that he put into motion. Now, this table will have a life. It will eventually go back to dust and be nothing. He says everything comes from nothing. It grows to maturity to where now it's a table. And then eventually it decays back into the nothingness where it came from. 1,000 years from now, this table will just be dust. So so he says that God is essentially the same way, where God has an idea and he can create something, and instead of like a table, he's creating the solar system or whatever, or a galaxy. Okay. And, but that galaxy is not God. It's God's mind started thinking and started motion. And once motion started, that's when we start to see things. That's when our senses can start to discern something. So I admit this is hard to fathom, but he says that this stillness that we can't see, it can be perceived actually in two places. Number one, at the center of a mass. Here, I'll give you a little diagram here. So imagine these two circles are two planets. Okay. There's a point of stillness right in the middle of the planet. That's, one point where the stillness is on the inside of matter. And then there's another point that is in between those two. Now, if the two pieces of matter were exactly the same size, and, then that point of stillness is going to be exactly in the middle. But most of the time, this point of stillness would be a little closer to one than the other. And I'll go into that later.
All right, hey, Scott.
Okay, so now, yes, bring it.
Okay. Okay, before you go on, you just talked about something absolutely incredible. And as you were speaking, I found myself, I believe, in absolute agreement with the way that you presented the idea of God is everything that exists within what we call God, the all, unknown, supreme. Okay.
Yes.
If we think that something, I have found the thing that exists without God, without on the outside of God, you have simply just expanded the circle. That's all science does, is it expands our circle and then simultaneously says, here's all the things we don't know. And so God is probably, if not is, period, incalculable, indefinable, and I don't want to say unknowable, because I know what you're saying about the knowing. It's that sense that the Gnostics would call it gnosis, right? The knowing of God. Right. But it is beyond any conception, truly, or awareness that anybody could ever articulate.
It's beyond our senses. That's what he tried to say, that it's beyond our, our sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing.
So I can take it.
Beyond those
absolutely.
Senses. But he said that if you, like, for example, if you meditate and you quiet your thoughts, you can, with much practice, eventually you can come to know God, like through, and it will be a cosmic kind of relationship where, like, you're literally not, like, once again, it is not in the sense world that we can see. However, as you practice, you will get to know, you can know God and you can work with God. And God has there's a rhythm to the universe and everything. And he talks about that. And that is how he was able to be such a prolific, sculptor, painter, all the stuff that he was able to do. He was proving that anyone can do this. Anyone can be a genius he said that genius, or no, he said mediocrity is, oh shoot, let me get the quote right. Yeah, mediocrity is, genius is self-bestowed, and mediocrity is oh, I'm not going to get the quote right. I'm sorry. But essentially, mediocrity, you're letting yourself be mediocre. Okay. But, or you can bestow genius upon yourself if you come into working with God.
This is like what people call enlightenment, right? It's a level of consciousness that's achieved, but it's only achieved through one's own self-perception. It's always was there in the first place, and you just had to be awoken to it within yourself.
You have to look within. He was big about looking within, like, you know, and so that resonated with me, you know, versus like going to, say, a church. You know, my mom always took me to church every Sunday, and, you know, and it didn't resonate with me. Okay. But this message of to look within myself to find God, look within yourself to find the kingdom of heaven, like that really resonates with me. And, you know, I kind of like that idea that like, that we could all have like a personal relationship with God, you know, instead of having to like look externally to like, you know, a preacher or someone, you know, telling you how to have a relationship with God.
I believe the reason why that is in religions is because it's antiquated ways of perceiving it. Now think back to like the Dark Ages, where the world was clouded in sin and very dense, like levels of thought. People weren't as vibrating at such a faster rate as they are today, and so their minds were like in a lower state of consciousness, right? And so like the only way to reach them was to explain God as something external. But then over time, obviously, we've evolved as a species now, and we can, because we're surrounded by advanced technology and blazing fast, we've basically closed the gap between the time it takes to complete actions down to like the infinitesimal smallest amount of time with the advent of like the infinite speeds of the internet, right? So like we are actually able to live now that we've broken through the barrier, crossed the threshold into escape velocity of the mind itself by our interaction and interconnectivity of our own minds and the minds around us. And so that's why like-minded is such an important piece of this. And that one other piece of this was how the part that humans struggle with getting over is like the ego, but it's because they don't understand that they are delineated away from the thought process. So in order for you to think, there is a linear progression from one thought to the next thought to the next thought, and that time element or duration between thoughts, or the movement or the wave of thinking or emotion, or these other natural characteristics that is part of the human experience. It's once you break away from that and recognize that because you're in a human body, you're tied into the linear thought process only insofar as you're willing to let yourself go there. And so if you start to perceive that things radially, which was the whole point of the radial documents back in the last summer, you know, you realize more that your consciousness is ever present inside and outside of yourself, and you can pull and attract those things that are most in alignment with your purpose, and that's self-defined by you. And this is what gets people wrapped up, is they don't understand that there is no separation other than one from oneself. And you have to really understand that you're the only thing that's going to be your own stumbling block, in that further and further integration into being synchronized as one hair follicle on the earth, and the evolution of the human species as a whole and beyond, going into an interstellar future. And I know that I just combined a lot of concepts all at once, but it's important for you to understand the power and the propellant behind what's happening with this consciousness evolution period of the history of the human race here on Earth.
Okay. So
dude, yes, yeah,
Axis. Okay. So I'm gonna comment to both of you guys real quick.
sure.
So Scott, you had said that, okay, we think that the table is real because I can touch it, and that our five senses are how we relate to what is real and not real.
Yeah.
Well, like you also said, and I completely agree with, everything that exists in reality was once an idea.
Yes.
And so where did that idea come from? Well, some call it the Akashic Records. Napoleon Hill called it the storehouse of infinite intelligence. And so I think that everything that is created, it's not actually invented, but rather discovered. So as you increase your degrees of awareness, that's why Russell was able to be, be a painter and a sculptor, because he probably had a more intuitive access to that storehouse of infinite intelligence, the Godhead, or however
Yep.
whatever terminology you want to use. And then as Axis, what you were saying is, you said that as human consciousness evolves, in relating human consciousness to the internet, this is actually an idea that I've been thinking about a lot. And I was actually talking about it just a few hours ago today, and how human beings and consciousness is, to a degree, like a software, and that imagination is the internet. And through accessing the internet, you can download your future. You can manifest whatever you want to in reality. And as we increase our degrees of awareness, we're going from dial up to, maybe 15 megabytes to maybe 100 megabytes. And then now we're on the gig and the fiber, and and we're getting faster and faster at being able to scan the internet, process the information, and download it into our reality.
Yeah. Russell, there's so much there.
So much. It's so
but yeah, definitely Walter is very clear that, anything that is created, he said that this universe is a creating universe. Like anything that is created in this universe, it all started from the mind. And what is the cause? It is the desire of mind. You can do whatever you desire to do, as long as you desire it. So you want it, and you have this idea, and that's the first half is having the idea. The second half then is doing the work, putting your strength into it, whatever you have to do to make it happen. But if you can do those two things, if you can imagine it and then work to create it, you can do anything you want. Okay.
Absolutely.
And it's
one of my favorite examples of this, just quickly, is imagine going back to 1905 and saying that I can swipe my thumb and anything that I want to eat of any food from anywhere in the world will show up on my front doorstep in 25 minutes.
Blasphemy.
And then what the people would look at you and say, and it's
put him on the pillory, light him on fire.
Yep.
He's clearly a heretic.
But then you fast forward to modern time, and then you see, through the working of the genius of someone like Steve Jobs, for example, who was able to have an idea, stick to it, stay focused in his intent and alignment in his purpose, was able to create the first ever applications of like the smartphone. And then now look how that's permeated the human consciousness and experience today. It's totally fundamentally shifted the economics of the internet and and how we get goods and services delivered to us. And he took an idea and he stuck to his guns on it, and he deduced it down through the imaginatory complex of the mind and the spirit, and then through the working of the hands and the managerial efforts of his company, was able to create for us something that totally shifted the trajectory of Earth forever.
Right. It's so okay. Look, I'm gonna drop some alpha right here. Okay, this is kind of Walter Russell alpha to help people if there's anything you ever want to do. So like, as I just described, you have to have the idea, but Walter says that thoughts actually are light. Okay, so like there's the mind, but the brain, he said, the brain is not the mind. Okay, the brain is more like a receiver, like a radio receiver that can tune in and capture messages from the mind, from that other that other universe that we can't sense with our senses. The brain can capture ideas from the mind, and once it tunes in to that idea, like you said, the Akashic records, or what he would actually say, that you're remembering it, or he says that all of the knowledge of all the universe of all time ever, future, past, present, is in the mind of God, or the mind of the universe. And so we as humans, it's our brain is the receiver. If we can tune into whatever that, you know, idea is, then our brain, not our mind, but, you know, our brain. Well, wait, first I should clarify. He says that each person, each human being, we also have our own minds. That is not our brain. It's a mind that is part of that is part of the mind of God. It's in that other universe, the universe we can't sense with our senses. And our minds that are there can send us these ideas, or they can have desires and then create the idea, you know, basically I don't know what you would call it, like, but send it to our brain. Okay. And then, so now once we receive the idea, like whether it's like a flash of an inspiration or whatever, thoughts start happening. Now that's where the electrical circuits of the brain start. And thoughts, you have to then, once you have the idea, you kind of know it, and then you have to then go, okay, well, what do I have to do to make this happen? Oh, I need to learn about this. I need to go meet this person, whatever. And so you start gathering these thoughts, all these little pieces of thoughts, and you are holding them in your brain until you're ready to put and so you have to gather all this thought power in your brain. And that's kind of the force of gravitation. Gosh, I haven't even gotten to gravitation yet, but it's compressing things that are wide apart into a small place.
Yeah.
Once you can do that, that generates power, and then you can release that power in a specific way to
Radiation.
then do what it is. Yes, radiation.
Another
exactly,
way is like calling
to do what it
lines of
is
intent.
that you want to do, and create that thought body. And then he says, you know, you create it in the physical world, then it's just light. It's a representation of the idea. So anyway,
doesn't that mean philosophically that all that really exists is the light thought, and then everything else is just an illusion that you've made manifest for your own perception?
Exactly, my friend. It's you know, he said that, like, for example, if you made a piece of artwork, it's not the artwork that's really important. It's the thought, the idea. And on top of that, so say, you know, if I create a sculpture and I put it on display, it's kind of meaningless unless it's so good that when someone else comes to view it, they get the thought that was in my mind. So it's a transference of the thought that was in my mind to their mind. That's what a good piece of art will do.
Telekinesis, maybe?
It will literally transfer the idea from one mind to another, but it's through the medium of this piece of artwork that represents the idea. And that's the difference between, like, a masterful artist will be able to do it so that you will just get you'll see it and be like inspired, like, oh my God, that's beautiful, you know. Whereas, like, if it's someone who's kind of lazy, just crappy artist, you'll look at the thing and be like, that's crap. I don't even know what he was doing, you know? So, but I thought that was kind of interesting that he kind of talks about
you see this in economics, in like trends, right? You see this in cryptocurrency. You have like those like blue chip things that are like really big ideas that permeate through and have, they don't only just emit that initial energy, but they store value longer term. And so it's like an idea at first that just blows up. And then, there's like these market cycles and this trendiness to people catching on to the idea like wildfire. But then it's after the wildfires have simmered back down, and that crystallization of that thought, that idea, that is like another one of those characteristics of nature, right? The really powerful ideas stick, and they forever alter the landscape.
Yeah, and it depends on the desire, the amount of desire that the person has from the beginning. Like, the more desire they have, the bigger like the idea can be. So, oh my gosh,
it's cool. Like, think about that. Like, what if there's thousands or millions of people all having the same desire, but they don't have the language to explain it to each other? and then
Right.
one guy creates the thing, Bitcoin. And it
Exactly.
just totally changes
Exactly.
everybody.
Yes.
That is exactly right. Oh man, that's and we will learn to work together more. We could do so much more when we work together, right? So guys,
Right,
I'm looking at the time. I see we're at about 1 hour and 7 minutes, and oh man, I got so many more slides, but you know, and there's so much to talk about through each of this. But I want to push forward just a little bit more. You know, just I got to at least try to get to the forces for you guys. Okay. All right. So light and motion we were talking about. Some light and motion can be seen by our human senses, and it's important to understand that we can only see a portion of the light. I'm going to kind of skip past this to show you this, right? We've all seen this kind of the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, in Walter's theory, it would just be the electric spectrum of light. We can only see this little band here of white because the frequencies are either too high or too low for our senses to see them. But just because we can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. Okay, so we're going to discuss how light moves, and it will apply to the moving light that we can see and the moving light that we can't see. But that's not to be confused with the still light that we can't see. Okay, so right, to discuss, first we have to discuss the forces that make the light move. One major difference in Walter Russell's concept versus traditional science is that if everything is made of light, then light has to have mass, because all this stuff has mass, right? But if it's all made of light, and that's another thing, the scientist in me goes, what are you talking about? Photons are massless, right? Like, we can talk about particles of light or photons in the section on the standard model versus Russell's structure of the atom, but that's only in a more in-depth version of this presentation. We won't get there today, but we can talk about gravitation and radiation. Now, first we have to understand this concept: equilibrium versus polarization. We have this universe. It's a universe of equilibrium or balance versus a universe of more and less, and that's polarization. I'm going to show you some examples here. So imagine two tanks of air, two boxes or tanks, whatever, and there's like a pipe connecting them and a little valve with like a pump. Okay, so at first they're connected, it's equilibrium, right? Now, when the pump is turned on, it pumps most of the air out of one tank into another tank. Okay, so now there's more air over here and less over here. Sorry, this is supposed to say more, but now we have an imbalance. So more air is now compressed in a smaller volume in one tank. The air is now under higher pressure and it's denser than before. And the air in the other tank is now at a lower pressure over here, and it's less dense than before. So we call this concept polarization. Okay, so we have to know that first in order to understand Walter's concept. So let's look at these examples of gravitation. So as you correctly guessed, KG, gravitation is the inward direction towards the center of mass, right? You see these arrows, and he puts a little plus because that's where there's more, it's denser there, okay? And there's little minuses around the outside because that's where it's less dense. And radiation is the opposite of that. It wants to thrust things away from the center of mass, out towards the minus. Goes from the plus out towards the minus, okay? More specifically, so gravitation is the force that causes light to move toward the center of mass, okay? And he calls this direction north, and he says north is positive. So the center of mass is the most north point and the most positive point. So Russell says gravitation is a positive force, okay? Radiation is the opposite, is the force that causes light to move away from the center of mass, and he calls this direction south. South is negative. The plane between two centers of mass is the most south point. Let me show you a diagram here. We got our two planets again. So the north point is the center of mass. The south point is this plane, this point in between the two centers of mass. Okay, so right, that's the most negative point. So we call this negative area, and we call radiation a negative force. Yeah, it has to be known that these two forces are opposites. They always move in opposite directions, 180 degrees from each other. And when one force is there, the other force is always there up in opposition, resisting it. It's like an action reaction. Like if you take a rubber band, as soon as you push on it, that first action of the force that you're stretching it, well, immediately there's a force that wants to snap it back to its equilibrium state. And that's kind of how gravitation and radiation work in Russell's concept. Now, in his concept, all light moves in a curve, and specifically, it follows a curved spiral path. Okay, and that's how that's why we see and throughout nature, the spirals. We've all seen like the kind of the Fibonacci kind of spiral thing, like a shell is a spiral and a galaxy is a spiral, because it's all one. This force is good on all scales. It's a comprehensive, theory of everything. I'm not going to go through the cycle of light. We'll come back. So to be more specific, I'm going to show you a diagram here. So imagine this is a little cone right here. You got a base of the cone down here, and this is the cone. Here we see a base of a cone. If you imagine like a spiral vortex of water going down the drain, okay, we all can imagine like the spiral going down the drain, right? So light starts as like the base of a cone, and then it extends spirally outward from that base, right? Think of the shape of a water going down the bathtub. It's a three-dimensional spiral vortex, and it's the force of gravity that causes this cone-shaped vortex, and it compresses light into a smaller space. And as the light is compacted into a smaller volume, it becomes more dense and under more pressure. Okay, so are you guys following me on this? All right, so this plane right here, we call this the plane of equilibrium, or the south inertial plane. And when it spirals towards the end, it's going towards the north, where there's the maximum pressure. And there's spirals this way, the north of maximum pressure. Here we're like looking down. So this is like if you're looking down the spiral of the water going into the, going down the bathtub drain, right? So this is what gravity does. It spirals things closer and closer together. And that's why all direction is curved and all motion is spiral. So how does this happen in 3 dimensions? Okay. Here's our equilibrium again. 2 tanks. We've got the less and more when it gets polarized, right? So once we know about polarization, and we remember this right here, these are the spirals. Now let me put them together for you. In a 3-dimensional world, it's more like this: 3 tanks, where they're all in equilibrium. But when the pumps turn on, one pumps this way and the other pumps the other way. So now we have less in the middle tank and more on the, more on the outer tanks. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. So now,
which becomes a form of balance in and of itself.
Right. So this right here, this spirals, I'm going to overlap them here. It would be like this. So the middle plane is where there's less. Here, let's put the middle south plane where it is negative, where there's less. This is the plane of equilibrium. And then when the gravity spirals the light outward, it takes it to where there's more, to the north. See, there's less in the middle. There's more on the outsides of the spiral. So this is how, when God starts thinking, this is how light gets polarized and separated. It gets separated from this inertial plane to the north. And so once again, this is how it would be in terms of like planets. Let me see, did I do right? In terms of planets, now we got our 2 planets. Now we can see the same thing. We have the inertial plane in the middle. Gravity spirals towards the center of a planet, okay, where it's compressing and then making more. And so the entire universe is a polarization. Let me see. When we look out into space, all we see is this polarization of little, stars, which are densely, packed. Like they're very like they're the north point, okay, where light has been compressed until we can see it, versus in between the stars where there's less. It's the light is more vacuous. We can't see it. So there's the whole universe is a polarization between more like places where there is more light, like suns, and places where there is less light in between the suns, in between the stars. Let's see. Sometimes one spiral vortex cone. So this is important. I got to try to get through this. One spiral vortex cone meets another spiral vortex cone. Okay. And when the two vortices meet, light can become concentrated into such a small volume that it becomes dense enough that our eyes start to see it. So here's kind of an example. We've got these two cones meeting. And so the light gets to a maximum point of compression, pressure, and density, like at the center of a sun. Then it must radiate. It just can't get any more dense. And it starts to radiate, okay? And it's the force of radiation that causes it to spread out in a flat pancake-shaped spiral. Think like the Milky Way shape. So here is a diagram of how nature stores energy into mass. So what does this look like? It looks like the planet Saturn, right? So if you imagine this as a planet, this is actually how gravity works, okay? So it comes in from the top. There's a cone here, and let me add this on here. Remember, we've got our bases of our cones, and the cones spiral in towards the north point where there's more stuff. And, there's another cone that comes in through the bottom, comes up, same thing, compressing into the middle where there's more stuff. And it gets so compressed, it has to radiate. And then when it radiates, it goes out through the equatorial plane and out towards south. So we got north in the middle and south on the outside. And so this is how gravity works. And this is the concept that no one has talked about this. Walter describes this, and I've never seen anyone else describe gravity like this. And once you kind of understand this concept, it explains gravity. Like our current science, we don't really know what gravity is, like mainstream science, but Walter clears it up. Here's a picture he drew, and this is what it would look like in the star. So this is kind of like the Milky Way galaxy, and this is the galaxy along its side edge. You have this cone coming in and another cone coming in. They meet in the middle. They compress all this stuff in there, and it has to go out the sides. And so it goes out in like a pancake spiral, a flat spiral. And this is the way that all matter works, whether it's a galaxy or whether it's a planet or whether it's a little atom. Okay. And eventually the light ends up back where it started its cycle. Like it started way out here, far apart. And as the force of gravity spiraled it tighter and tighter and tighter, then it comes to where we can see it. And then the force of radiation sends it out the sides, spiraling around, and then it eventually gets back to where it came from, to the nothingness where it came from. So it's a two-way cycle. And our current science, it only sees one half of the cycle. We only see the radiative portion because we can't see the light when it's so wide apart and such low frequency as it's coming together. But we only see it once it's come together so much and been compressed so tightly together that it becomes incandescent. It's the resistance of radiation resisting against gravity that kind of it causes things like heat. But the point is, we only see the sun after it's been created as a sun. But we didn't see the first half of the cycle where gravity was pulling it all together. And that's kind of, the main thing that mainstream science has missed. All right, this is the last section here of, all right, 3D vortex motion. So we've seen this before. So Walter talks about a cubic wave field. So here's a cube. And if we had, here's our plane. Once again, this is our, go back, oops, sorry. Our inertial plane that gravity is going to start the spiral, or the base of the cone, right, is kind of here. Well, when it starts spiraling out, radiation is like the opposite force. And they like play a game of chicken. They can't go through each other. So they have to turn to avoid each other. And so what ends up happening when you get the expansion of gravity outward, it starts spinning. And it spins, it hits the sides first of the cube, and it's forced to the path of least resistance, which is the corner of the cube. Let's see. We've seen that before. And so what ends up, when you have two vortices meeting, two gravity vortices meeting, it's here he shows it like in a straight line, but in reality, it's more like this. It'll be a curvature where one meets the other. And here's what it looks like in three-dimensional space, where this is one cubic wave field, this is another cubic wave field, and what ends up happening is, gravity winds the light up until we can see it like there would be a sun right here or a planet, and eventually it comes back down. Now these 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, this gets into chemistry because that's the gyroscopic plane. I'll have to, we're not going to be able to get to that tonight. But okay, let's see. I'm going to stop there because I know that was a lot, but like I kind of I wanted to rush through it because I saw where the time was. And like, I at least had to try to give you guys something about like gravity and kind of how this is how matter is put together. Russell says the force of gravity is a spiral vortex that compresses light into form. So I know that's a lot, but there's any questions or comments?
So that was a lot, and not in a bad way.
Okay.
You have clearly studied this, and what you have just presented it's going to take reflection and dive in questions. But I will be honest in that I didn't get every single point so intimately, but there were things you were saying. I was like, they were resonating. There were things you were saying that I can see you were going with, he was coming from. And I think the idea of gravity in the sense of contraction and radiation in the sense of expansion. It's so important because that's how everything is. We breathe, right? Gravity, radiation.
Yep. Exactly. You got it.
The same thing with the muscles. They contract and release. Everything is a contraction and a release. That is the nature of our reality. And,
there's similarities like the yin yang. We've all seen the yin yang where there's like a dark spiral and a light spiral. This is very similar. This is a version of the truth, but the yin yang is like 2-dimensional. Imagine that in 3 dimensions, a spiraling in 3 dimensions. So,
right. And when you were saying that the vortexes came together at that point of absolute density, one thing that I was thinking was, okay, you said it had went back. I wonder if it doesn't go back to its place of origin, and rather when it does do that pancaking effect that you described, it just goes off and it becomes the starting vortex for other things over here that then become it's just
Yes. Now that's you got it, man. That's a more advanced level of this, but yes, exactly. That's exactly what it does.
Okay.
And here's an example in our solar system. So that vortex comes from the sun. It first hits Mercury, and it will do the same thing here. It will spiral in to the center of Mercury, and then it will shoot out the sides. And it will shoot out the sides, and it will go to the next planet, Venus, right? And it will do the same thing. It will come in through the top, through the poles, and then it will shoot out the sides. And it will do that as it expands through every planet of our solar system until it gets out to the last planet, and then it shoots out, and it shoots out farther. And from there, it's just going to go to like the next solar system, or next galaxy or whatever. Like it's because the cone that made the sun is so vast and huge. Like when it returns to where it came from, and that's so far away. That's so many millions, billions of miles away that, it's going to run into things on its way back home. And so yeah, that's awesome that you.
Sounds like the experience of being a human, living a human life.
Dude, that's okay.
Yes.
Yes. And also these words here, integration and disintegration, are axis. I was literally thinking that exact thing. That is the human life cycle. Wherever we came from, we actually disintegrate into existence. And then when we die, we integrate back into wherever the heck it is we came from. Both physically, we digest into the earth, and the worms eat our body, and the birds eat the worms. But then whatever makes me KG and you Scott and you Axis, that also probably to the same way our body does in the ground, our psyche, our personality does the same thing in some unforeseen plane as well.
Well, actually, Walter's he talks about that, and I love that you got that, because this theory, Walter's theory, is also a theory of creation, and it's not just a creation of like a desk or a planet, but of life. And I skipped that part because it's another deep thing that we didn't have time for. But yes, you caught it, man. All of the light that gets wound up into something, so it has a cycle, and it can be compared to like birth. And dude, now I got to go back because like this was the slide that I skipped. So as light moves, the cycle it follows can be described as a life cycle. It's born, it grows to maturity, and then it degrades and dies. And so if you think of a man, it's born, as a baby, it grows to maturity of like a man of like, say 45 years old or something, and then it starts to degrade, and then eventually it goes back to the nothingness, that it came from. And that is like that for all life forms and all matter. It's all light that gets wound up, and until it becomes a body that we can see or sense, and it lives, and whatever its length of its cycle, it varies, and then it gets unwound, and it goes back to the nothingness that it came from. We think of the Big Bang, right? Like all the stuff that we see, you're telling me, oh, it came from one small infinitesimal spot. Like that seems kind of crazy to me. Walter said it's more like billions of little bangs, okay, that are happening, that are creating things that come into life. They live for a life cycle, and then they die, only to be repeated again in another life cycle. He's all about it, cycles and repetition. I just skipped that because it's like kind of a deep thing, and like, but yeah, you got it. You hit the nail on the head, dude. Like life. This whole, when I say it's a theory of everything, it's literally a theory of everything in the universe. So not only is it like physics, but it's like of life. I mean, we don't have the time, but it's chemistry, it's crystallization. Like we don't think of rocks as being alive, but that rock, it had a life cycle. And there is one of the other dimensions is sex. So there's there's female and male, and female and male come together when they come together at the amplitude of the wave, which, well, when they come together, they
Creation.
reproduce, and they make more bodies of males and females, who then will live and die, and who will also reproduce. And so, yeah, it's all a cycle. It's great. I'm so glad you like caught that, man. That's amazing.
Well, I'm glad I hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
Dude.
All right, guys.
We're at an hour and a half, and
getting at the hour and a half. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that this warrants a part 2. Hopefully, in the not too distant future. Maybe. We won't say now. We'll have something planned here in the not too distant future, guys, because this has been a really awesome conversation. And I find myself both intrigued and just consistently like hitting new levels of understanding in this. So,
Axis. Sorry, let me, because I wanted to just quickly respond to what KG said when he talked about the body being born and then going back. Like Walter would say, the mind actually does not die. So it is the physical body. Our physical body is literally just a representation of the idea that our own mind has. Our mind creates our body. Like on one person, you might have long hair. The next person wants to have short hair. It's their own mind that's creating them. Whether they want to eat a lot and get really big, or not eat a lot and be thin. So the mind or the idea never dies. And because he says that in that mind world, that's the real world, he literally says that we don't die. The only thing that dies is our physical body, which is an illusion anyway, and it's only temporary. But it only dies for a little bit, because then it's like, remember that cycle. It's born, it grows to maturity, then it goes back and dies, but just to be born again in another body. And so your mind will want you to have another body. People call it reincarnation, but he's saying that our mind is the real thing, and that never dies. It's only our body, which is the fake thing, the illusion thing, that's temporary, that dies, but it will be reborn again. So I just wanted to throw that in there just to clarify that.
I hear what you're saying, and I would agree that the mind, the ultimate mind, God, cannot die. It is beyond death. But the ego that makes up me, KG, and you, Scott, even if there was reincarnation, which I'm not saying there is or isn't, just not saying one way or another, if there was this physical death but not the mind death, I feel like what seems most real to me is that the individual culmination of ego, me does dissolve, and KG is not maintained beyond physical death.
All right, I got one more thing to say to you then, because I'm sorry.
Sorry, Axis.
We didn't get
sorry, Axis.
Oh my God. Can I do one last thing, Axis?
Yeah, man, go ahead. Take it away.
Okay. So this is more advanced in the theory, but we didn't get to chemistry and stuff, but like literally the inert gases are not what humans think they are. But what Walter says is that light starts at the inert gases and forms a body like KG, and all of the motion through all of KG's life cycle, from birth to maturity and then back to death, all of that motion and all of those experiences are recorded in the inert gas that you started from. And that way, when you are reborn, that information of your life as KG is actually recorded into your soul. Okay, into the mind that doesn't die. That is all recorded and not lost. I was blown away when he said that. I was like, "What, dude? What are you talking about? How can an inert gas record something?" But I just wanted to let you know that because you made logical sense. Like, oh well, then you know, if you go through that life cycle, then you would die, and all of the stuff that made me KG would also die. But yeah, Walter specifically talks about that, how everything is recorded and maintained so that when you are reborn, that information is still there. And so that way your soul can continue to evolve over eons or whatever, or millions of years. I don't even know how long, but
Infinity.
the point is infinity or whatever, until you reach the point where you're, you know, like one with God or whatever. I'm not the philosophy guy. I kind of, you know, I'm more on the science. I'm amazed by the science, but his philosophy stuff, like there's people who know it way better than me, and like there's a lot of that stuff in there, you know. Anyway, so there you go. I hope that was worth. I hope that was worth the extra few minutes, man.
Hell yeah.
Fair points. Fair points.
Well, maybe next time we start with inert gases in the recording.
I
That
think
sounds like a good spot to start.
I think so.
All right. Well, yeah, sure. Well, take you through the chemistry, and it's so much, dude. But
It
yeah,
makes sense.
great.
Like my intuition is that, like, isn't argon one of those inert gases that
That's
has
right.
like a super stable structure? So then wouldn't that be the most stable compound to store information in?
Yeah, that's right. Inert gases don't react with anything because they're
Mm.
not. Anyway, they're not
all right.
elements.
Well, that's all sounding like, you know, like I might be onto something there.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, well, we might have to do this again.
All right, man. Well, appreciate you guys so much. Everybody in the chat, thanks for joining us. Man, we'll see you on the next one. All right.
Thank you, Axis.
Right.
Thank you, Scott.
Peace
Thank
out,
you,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you, guys. It was great.
Later.
Later.